Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy. Last week, this time, I was at the University of Edinburgh, the Center of African Studies, and I hope it's going to also be very tough. You know, when it comes to talk about democracy in Africa, it's a very complicated topic. So when I was coming, I planned to present one paper, but I realized I have two joint papers that can match each other and they complement each other and I can fit within the 30 minutes, I hope so. So I'm going to present it. Here is kind of democracies and the threats and how we can rebuild that democracy. So here is our project is a DEMET project at the University of Glasgow, and the DEMET is democracy and the threats, how civic education can help to build democracy. So I'm going to give more details. But a little bit about me. Here, the person in red is me. That was 10 to 11 years ago. I'm a co-founder of one of the biggest civil society movement in Burkina Faso. We started in 2009. And here, the person here on your left, here is the one, this one. I don't know how to show this. But this one is the one who later became the prime minister of the country during the transition period. And after they said, no, we don't want a military on power, so we change it. And then we have a civilian. So I was the one in red. The other one in black was the head of the movement, the leader of the movement. Now he's in jail because they said he tried to foment a coup d'etat against the current president, but still there is no proof about it because no judgment has been done. So this is the movement. More probably we can discuss about it. To tell you that my involvement in promoting democracy starts from lived experience. You know, my role in this movement was to try to organize the civic movement, grassroots mobilization, going from village to village, discussing with people to be able to convince them to join the movement. So we can go in detail. So today I'm going to present two papers. The first paper is to try to make a diagnosis. Democracy is backsliding in Africa and deconsolidating in the West. And why that? Most of the studies say this is because of threats, mostly terrorism. But most of these studies in the West are just one single terrorist attack, while in the context of Africa is chronic attack, almost a civil war. And we don't know exactly how these affect democratic support in Africa. So with this project, I tried with my colleague to try to see whether exposure to terrorism undermines democratic support. And we found, yes, when people are exposed to the threat of terrorism, they are less likely to support democracy. And then we say, okay, what are we going to do then? Are we going to stay or we are going to do something? So the next paper tried to provide a remedy. What we decided is to say, what if we try to reframe democracy as a security advantage and then create some short video, 3 to 4 minutes, randomly assigning people to these videos. And we realized that when we can frame like the democracy as an asset for democracy, we are more likely to promote it. We try to use Facebook advertisement to recruit people, so I haven't been there. And then we randomly assign. I'm going to explain a little bit about the methodology. So from the terrorism and democratic support. Here, when you look at, for example, this map, it shows that most of the conflict, the terrorism is in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. But as you can see, this area on your left is the Central Sahel, where you have Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, very hit. And Burkina Faso, my country, is the most affected by terrorism now. But the Lake Chad, Nigeria, Chad, and Cameroon, all this area also is affected by terrorism at this moment. And at the same time, we can observe around 2022 a kind of democratic decline, as you can see. And this period was marked by also the COVID-19, because COVID is a threat that makes people to just restrict civil liberties, and people buy it. And also, but the good news about that is when you look at from 1850s overall, we are getting more democratic with time. Though we have some moment of backsliding, we are getting more democratic, and this is very important to notice. Here, the idea of threat and democratic attitude. What do theories say about that? The first idea is what you call the authoritarian reflex. When we face threats, the only thing we want a strong man, someone who is very strong enough to protect safety. So because of it, people are sometimes more likely to trade security and liberty. What do you prefer when you face, there is a bombing right now? What do you want? Do you want someone who is strong now to be able to help you to fight the conflict? Or you are going to be saying, okay, look, I prefer my freedom of my human rights and so on like that. So most studies say people are more likely to relinquish their freedom in exchange to security. The terror management theory says that when people are reminded about the mortality silent, when you are exposed to something that reminds you how vulnerable you are also more likely to prioritize order, control over any kind of policy. And then we have these emotion things saying that people feeling anxious are more likely to prefer security than other side. On the other side, there are some kind of heterogeneous affect. It means we try to see whether this effect is dependent on the country development level or the level of democracy. And we found, surprisingly, that in more democratic country, for example, people are less likely to support democracy when they're exposed to terrorism. We're going to see it in detail at the end. So the data. So I use Afrobarometer round 9. And the idea of this methodology, because we're talking about methodology soon with my friend here, is the idea is how we can derive a causal inference in this situation. First of all, we have what we call the unexpected event during survey design. Generally, I use to map. So I take, for example, the geocoded data from Afrobarometer and ACLI data, where I extracted the conflict. And also we have the global terrorism data. What you just do is once you match the Afrobarometer individual's location with the conflict location, so you have a big sample. Now what you're going to do, you're going to try to identify exactly who has been surveyed before, after the first terrorism attack in the location. This idea is because the theory said when the survey is ongoing, it's not related to any political event that might happen in this area. If there is an event that happened in this area, it happens unexpectedly, and it happened as if it randomly separates the sample into people being exposed to it and people not being exposed to that. And by doing so, you can have a kind of quasi-experimental design. On top of this, we use what you call entropy balancing. Entropy is a kind of matching. So you have to match individual being surveyed after and before on demographic characteristics to be sure that they're almost similar. And then the only difference between them after this will be the event that happens. So this is what I use there. If anyway you can still ask some more questions, I can come on that. So here, this is the main findings. Here we found that, for example, when people are exposed to terrorism, they have like kind of, compared to the control group, you have a 6.7% less likely to support democracy. And then there are 4.3% less likely to see the country as democratic. But we don't have a very strong, significant effect when it comes to rejecting authoritarian rule. Here, we tried to do some robustness using the global terrorism data to match. Again, you can see that it's consistent. This means when people are exposed to terrorism, they are less likely to support democracy. And we try, as I said, to use the Human Development Index and also the level of democratic index. We can also see in this context that people being in the country where they have a relatively good economic development, they are more likely to less affected. The effect is less, is weaker compared to the people who are just in a very poor country. And then in people in more liberal democracy, we can see also this effect. That's almost the idea about this. So for the first paper, very quickly, so we found that when people are exposed to terrorism, they are less likely to support democracy. And this, the basic idea is that because people, most of the time, they prefer security over liberty and freedom. This is consistent with studies. So now we come back to say our study can fit with the overall global studies that try to see the relationship between exposure to threats and democracy, and we can say now, yeah, that's happened. And we try some context things we see about young and elderly, and we find that, okay, look, younger people and older people are more vulnerable because of the vulnerability hypothesis. That's the key finding and takeaway quickly for the first paper. So now that we see that, that people exposed to terrorism are less likely to trust, to support democracy. And the basic idea was that people always believe that an autocratic regime is more likely to fight terrorism. And now, because of it, we need to think about how to bridge this. That's when we go to Burkina Faso, in our area, my country now, where everything is very controversial. So there you can see, for example, the central Sahel of Burkina Faso is a part where terrorism is really hitting. So this is the northern part, Dori, anyway, you don't know, but it's very crazy. And 2 to 3 days before, there was a very crazy attack where more than 100 soldiers were killed. So you can see that people every day are living in this situation. But first of all, we have, after our movement that we held in 2014, we were able to change the president of the country. So Blaise Compaoré had to run to find himself in Ivory Coast, and he became an Ivorian. And then we went for election, and Roch Marc Christian Kaboré, the second civilian, after the first one, which was Maurice Yameogo, become president, being elected twice. And then in January 2022, Lieutenant Damiba, a military, did a coup. And the argument was that this president wasn't able to really secure the country. And many people, there were mass protests on the street because people were supporting this kind of policy. But at the same time, after some time, people start feeling that it's not really fighting well. And then we can discuss after the presentation why in depth. But this, Ibrahim Traoré was part of it. It was the same group. And then within the group, Ibrahim Traoré did a coup to Damiba because they think he was not really fighting well. And people also were on the street and were very happy. So now we have a return of military strongman in Burkina Faso. And for the east of our country, since 1960 to now, the country has been governed by military. You only have a military rule from 1960 to 66, and then 2015 to 2022. The remainings are military on power, to give you a sense of how the country is now. So here, in terms of political, now we have Ibrahim Traoré on power. He has a small, quick meeting with his friend, and he extended his term for 5 more years, up to 2029. And they quit ECOWAS and stuff because they believe that this regional organization are not supporting. And so now they just restricted everything. Human Rights Watch is not reaching Burkina Faso, RFI, all the different media cuts. So they say they are imperialist. In terms of terrorism, compared to last year, we can see there are slight improvement. But for the third year in the row, Burkina Faso has been the first country the most affected by terrorism in the world in terms of fatality. And we have more than 2 million people internally displaced, and many of them ran away, and they are living in the neighboring country, Ivory Coast. And the JINIM is the strongest one. And you've seen what happened recently in Mali, where they blocked the road, even asked the population in Mali to beg, to say, sorry, we want to have access to the fuel and others, to transportation, and to be able to travel. And it shows you how much control they have on the region. So when you have this very difficult context, where almost every day there is terrorist attack. If you check on Google right now, you see probably there is a terrorist attack somewhere else, where it's very difficult to go. The question is how you have to do some research there, collect data without considering the ethics, because in terms of collecting data, you have to protect the researcher. Also, you have to consider the ethical aspect of it, the mental being and all the things of the researcher. So we decided, in our team, we developed it, and that's what we've been doing a lot. We use Facebook advertisement to recruit people in Burkina Faso. So what we do instead of going, we generate, this one is a kind of a voucher, where we have that on Facebook, we put this advertisement, and everyone only in Burkina Faso can have access to this voucher. And then it tells you, if you take part of the survey, you can just be part of a lottery and get this money. It's a lot of money in Burkina Faso, and I don't know how much, it's $200 around. And then what we did is that, and then all the questionnaire are done on Qualtrics. And then we design, and when the person click on the link, they leave Facebook and they go on Qualtrics and they fill the survey. That's the first one. The second, we design different intervention. The first one is a more placebo. A placebo is a kind of a control group. That's someone who doesn't have access to any content related to politics or terrorism. This was a kind of space exploration, a 3-minute where people have to look at the advantage of exploring what Elon Musk is doing on the sky, right? And then the other one was how we're going to present the information to the people to convince them. So we have first a more general democracy advantage. So we talk about democracy is good for people. In 3 minutes, you can see some video. This is part of the content where people have to see exactly what is democracy, institutional check and balance, and something like that. And the second video is still general, but more focused on how democracy can help fight in a sustainable way terrorism, without mentioning any specific effect related to the country. And then the third one, the last one, is very specific to Burkina Faso, showing how terrorism would have been in Burkina Faso if it was done democratically, bringing all the different aspects of it. So all of this is to try to have a more abstract framing to a more localized framing, to see which one works best. It's very important. And so here we found that when we frame it more general, it has the greatest effect, and we're going to see why. Here, this is a demographic. These are the outcomes we measured. But what is striking here, you can see, for example, that people, we have around 75% of people always feel like they prefer democracy. And this is a tendency everywhere in Africa. People might say we don't like democracy, but if you look at an Afrobarometer, even the recent one, around 66% of Africans say they prefer democracy. Around the same amount of a proportion of people believe that the country is a democracy, though they have some problem. Half, 30% say with minor problem, 30% with major problem. And the same proportion of people say they are not really satisfied with democracy, but they still do prefer democracy. But at the same time, you can see that they are less likely to reject it, meaning that preference of democracy is not directly reflected in rejecting non-democratic alternatives. Meaning there is a kind of tension between I prefer democracy, but at the same time, I don't want authoritarian leadership. So there is this tension there. So here, these are the theories that we have. The first one is the first. We know that people support non-democratic alternative because they believe that a strong authoritarian regime is more able to fight terrorism. So we need to just try to target and to counter this argument, this narrative, if you really want to convince people that democracy works. And we had data inside. We tried to see the fatalities across all the countries being affected by terrorism in the world. And then we found that around 6 times fatalities occurred in non-democratic countries than in democratic countries. Meaning that even if terrorism hits both democracy and non-democracy, but it kills more in non-democracies than in democratic. So the need hypothesis says when you want to try to help someone, you have to be sure that that person needs help. Otherwise, it will never work. So that's the hypothesis that we use. And the regulatory fit says if you want to convince someone, you have to frame it in a way that match the person needs. So when people need security, if you frame it about anything else, we are not sure if it's going to work. So here we try to match the framing in order to be sure that it's going to resonate with people so that we can be sure that it's going to work. But at the same time, theory says you have to be careful because when people are exposed to terrorism, they have some kind of trauma. For example, someone, in our data, 77% of respondents said that they've been exposed directly or indirectly to terrorism. Either they lost someone, either they have a parent who ran away from a terrorist place, they have the house of things being burned. So meaning that it's very high in terms of emotions. And it's there since 2016, meaning that it's a sustained conflict that is there. So the question is, if you have to go too deep, that's what the theory says, people might not relate, the kind of dissociation, cognitive dissociation with the thing, and they can try to create a kind of psychological safety. So I don't want to be reminded about traumatic events, so I can just be kind of denying the reality even if it is true. So we say, okay, we have to keep it in mind while designing the intervention so that we can observe whether the data says it or otherwise. So here, this is the main effect. The main effect, we have the pooled one, and then we put all the different interventions to see whether the pooled one works. Here you can see, for example, that first, people are more likely to see that democracy had an advantage of in fighting terrorism compared to those who are not exposed to this intervention, on average. That's good. We find also that people are more likely to prefer democracy. It's boosted, that there's a marginal effect on that. And also they are also strongly more likely to reject authoritarians, which is really amazing. But at the same time, we don't know which intervention works best. Here we separate. You can see, for example, those people being in the civic right treatment where we talk only about democracy with no relation with terrorism and stuff. It only moves preference for democracy and the rejection of authoritarianism. But it doesn't really affect behaviors. Behaviors have an attitude that hard to move. When it's come to the general terrorism, it works best because you can see, for example, that almost democratic advantage, preference for democracy, rejection of authoritarianism, and all the behavior, you can see that it moves. It has the strongest effect. But at the same time, when it comes to the Burkina Faso, where we talked about realities, because there we use media, real clear facts about what the media says, and even that is widely known in the country. But people, it doesn't matter. People, there's no difference between people being exposed to the videos about the Burkina Faso treatment and then those people in the control group. And the question is, why? And the why questions bring us to try to check some kind of diagnosis. Remember what the theory said. Theory said when you are exposed to traumatic events, it might make you to reject it. So we ask people whether the video you just watched reflects your country, whether you want to share this information with people or whether this information is informative. When you can see, for example, more we go to the more localized one, and people become strongly less likely to see the video are reflecting the reality and whether the country fits and so on. So meaning that theoretically, these localized videos backfired. People just reject it because we talk either about democracy or we talk about terrorism. That's what the theory said. So on average, what we found here that we provide an empirical contribution to say, look, when people are in very traumatic events, they will be less likely to trust or support democracy. But it's still possible for you to make them to continue to have this strong commitment for democracy. You just need to frame the content in a way that resonates with the reality, but at the same time shouldn't be too localized because it can create some kind of psychological safety or dissociation copy mechanism that might make people to reject the content even if it's true. So that's what we found, the two papers that I tried to summarize in short, expecting that we can have a lot of questions and discuss. Thank you. The other one, I didn't put it here because I wasn't sure it's going to be 30 minutes, but the other paper is very short, in 1 to 2 minutes.
Yeah, I can give you 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, that's good.
About it, yeah.
Exactly. So the other one is more about Thomas Sankara, and because I was trying to understand the post-revolutionary governance in Africa with a focus on Thomas Sankara. So the question is why Thomas Sankara has been killed after 4 years of running the country. So I tried to go through the policy of Thomas Sankara, and I found 3 different things, arguments that I'm trying to defend in this article. That I'm done with it right now, but I'm still editing. The first one is this kind of ideological ambiguity. Most of the time when people are going for revolution movement, for example, they bring everyone. For example, in the case of Burkina Faso, you have the labor unions, you have the communists and Marxists, you have the traditionalists, you have the Pan-Africanists. Everyone was there when it comes to make the revolutionary in the August 4, 1987, in 1983. When it's happened, after that, you need to govern. How revolutionary people can govern the state. They fail. One fail was the confrontational policy. When Thomas Sankara arrived, he believed that the traditional leaders, they were just complicit with the neo-colonialism. That's what Ibrahim Traoré is repeating, right? So the idea is simple because during the colonial era in Burkina Faso, when France colonized Burkina Faso, what they did, they have some kind of agreement with the traditional leaders to protect them and maintain the influence in the zone. We can go in depth after what happened there. And then because of it, all the revolutionary and the Marxists and Thomas Sankara in particular, they see them as being value local de l'imperialism, right? So we need to fight them. Because of it, it created what they call the Committee of the Defense of the Revolution. That's going to be in the village level, try to control all of the thing. But what is missing, the point is, people in Burkina Faso, most of the time in Africa, they are all connected to the traditional chief, no matter what you do. So by trying to be confrontational with the chief, it lost the rural support and basis. That was one of the weaknesses. That's why when Blaise Compaoré came, he created coalesce with the traditional chief, and Thomas Sankara was just alone. When Thomas Sankara said, if you heard that Blaise Compaoré wants to kill me, don't do anything, he's done. Because he knew no one was going to support him. He lost all support. Second, the urban one. All those Marxists, because the labor union were controlled by the Marxist people. But inside them, they have different people. You have the Maoists, Albanese. Those people want a national liberation, everything. So they have a different current within the left at the time, and they also wanted to control the movement. And Thomas Sankara said it won't work like that. All of you guys have to fit within the CDA, the Committee of the Defense of the Revolution, in order to control them. They failed. So they even quit. The biggest one quit the party, so Sankara lost the support in the urban area. Third one, it was around the 80s. After 47, after the World War II, what's happened is the West who has a very anti-communism policy. Even most of the aid at that time, up to the 90s, were to fight communism. And then any resistance, any leader was kind of Marxist-Leninist, left-wing leaning, was a target, like Lumumba, all those movements. And Sankara was very left, Marxist-Leninist, right? Having an anti-Abidjan, like anti-Western movement against Ivory Coast. And all of these things isolated the country and making Sankara to be in a situation where you don't have domestic support, you don't have international support. Even in a certain time, people say that he lost the support of Gaddafi because Gaddafi wanted to control him after, and then he lost it. So he had no support of Gaddafi. So finally, he ended up isolated with no domestic support, no international support, and then the coup in 1987 was very easy. That's why it happened on the first day at 4 p.m. No one ever did anything in the country. It was very easy because he lost control. So the argument of this paper is, most of the time when people want to go into revolutionary movement, they go with a confrontational policy, while in fact we don't have the means for this confrontational policy. And Ghana and Rawlings, for Ghanaians, they know. Rawlings did the same policy, the revolutionary democracy, from 81, but reaching 88, he faced the same problem like Thomas Sankara did, but he was smart enough to make some reform, to open up the economy to a multi-party democracy, receiving support from the IMF and stuff. That's why he was able to move from a revolutionary democracy to a multi-party democracy and strengthening the democracy in Ghana. So it's not the revolution of Rawlings that made Ghana democratic, but it's the shift in policy from a Marxist-Leninist approach to a more democratic one, multi-party one, that made Ghana to be a very strong democracy. My argument, maybe if Sankara was still around, maybe he would do that. We never know. But to say that confessional policy will never work in the context of Africa, so we have to be smart enough in the way we try to approach revolutions and resistance. That's what I'm discussing there, and I will get your feedback and then to try to enrich it. I'm still working it.
Yeah. So, questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Really interesting paper.
Yeah.
We so often kind of see that these like localized contextual messages are going to be more effective, right? So it's so interesting to see something that kind of goes against that idea. I think your kind of proposed mechanism of why people are reacting that way, like they're kind of re-traumatized by the video itself and kind of it reminds them of the context is really interesting. But I was also kind of wondering if there's maybe just something more simple going on. So is it possible that kind of the Burkina Faso video maybe captures real life dynamics more accurately? So people are kind of okay with supporting democracy in the abstract, but then when they're trying to actually think about their kind of realistic experiences, they're kind of more likely to consider the nuances and maybe give an answer that more closely reflects how they would behave in real life. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Okay, we go or we just...
We can take one or two more questions. So that's good. Okay, so one here, another, and then I'll come back for another round here.
Can I ask one?
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
I guess the paper is based on the prefix of democracy is good, right? So did you do any comparison of democracy and kind of what the end goal is, I feel like the prefix of democracy being good is very much kind of like the things that you should know when going into it. So have you done any comparison of what the end outcome or like the estimated outcome could be if it's not democracy, if it's authoritarianism? So what I'm trying to get is why did you start with democracy as kind of the good and then how it can work?
Thank you. Thanks so much. Super interesting, particularly because we're looking at research methods in a single study. Great to see the variables. So my question is, for those you mentioned policy insights. So I'm wondering what next and what are the policy insights? What practically would you be recommending and what do you hope to see as a result of the research?
Yeah, we can raise this and we can do another round.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you very much for your questions. They are very exciting. And these are the questions almost that comes, and it's very cool. For the first question regarding whether the Burkina Faso is really capturing the real dynamics of what is happening, that's true. It's capturing what people are living, right? The real life, because in the video you have terrorism issues of video, so people are really affected by that. That's true. That's why we wanted it to be localized. Now the question is whether they want democracy in abstract, not in reality, right? For this question, I say not the one democracy in reality. And that's why, for example, we have all those political instability. Military intervention in politics in Burkina Faso have always been opportunistic. It's always started by mass protest. People go on the street claiming freedom and independence. And then the military always observe, like what's happened in Madagascar, that people are fighting, the regime is almost collapsing, and they come and they take power. That's the only thing. The only one who took power directly was Blaise Compaoré without mass protest, because the only moment where everyone was almost happy with the governing regime, right? But at the same time, what people don't say, Blaise Compaoré was the one who did the revolution in October 83. And he's the one who ended it in 87. People sometimes think it's Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara was captured by the existing president at the time, Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo. It's Blaise Compaoré who came militarily with civilians to do the revolution of August 83. That's also history, right? So that's very important. Now, the Live Democracy people may have been lucky to go in the battlefield, right? I was in we created one of the biggest civil society organizations starting in 2009. 10, 11, 12, people believe that Ballet Citoyen, the civic boom, was just in October 2014. It has started long ago. And we discussed with people. And the question sometimes, how we were able to convince those people, we say, look, guys, right now you're living in a place and we want to know exactly how do you see yourself in what is happening? Do you want people to come and put road, put electricity, whatever, without asking you what you want, or you want them to just involve you in the process of decision making? People say they do want that, right? So anytime they feel excluded, I think people just react massively to try to be involved. So I believe that what is happening really in this context is people really, I don't have any doubt that people in Burkina Faso really want democracy in practice. But the problem here is they are really facing a situation of trauma, right? And now, for example, me, when I talk to people back then, I'm not trying to say it like Traoré is good or bad. I don't say that. Why? Because people are really suffering, they're in pain, right? So what they really want is an answer to their pain. So you can't come and say, this is good, this is not. What you have to do is to try to show them how things would be if we're fighting well. That's come to your question, right? So to move to this to say, look, people really want democracy, but at the same time, they're in a situation where they really want security. Now we say, which regime would fight best? There are different studies that show that, right? It's called the U-curve, right? People say that full democracies and full autocracies are more likely to fight better terrorism, but the anocracies, those in the middle, are more vulnerable. But with recent studies, people say that people believed before that full autocracy were stronger because they used to media wasn't open, so it was harder to know exactly how many people died there. And so it was harder to have data. Now that people have data, they realize that democracy is better. Why democracy is better? Because of the means of democracy. For example, look at right now in Burkina Faso, for example, where the terrorist organization are occupying, they have a lot of civilians that they are coming. They shifted the strategy. They are not killing anyone. They are recruiting people from the people in there. Many people were recruited from Ghana. What's happened right now? The government is using a hardcore policy. Right? There is no one issue, right? There is no parliament, there's nothing exists. The government decided to go and fight. But what is happening is the number of soldiers being killed, no one talk about it, but families are frustrated there. Many people are joining the regime to retaliate against the hardcore way the government is doing, right? The government fighting. Because you don't respect human rights, because you say you kill it, it's tough. Because we understand they are panicking. You can see a...
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Support for Tuareg?
Yeah.
We're hearing the great things about Tuareg. Most of Africa wants a Tuareg to come in. You're telling me something different?
The Tuareg, the terrorist?
Tuareg is
Traoré? No. I mean, no, this debate, anyway, we move to that, and but we continue with slowly. The debate about this is simple, right? Is when people are using this hardcore measure, right? What is happening is that you not respect human rights. Recently, the soldiers were accused of killing more than 160 civilians in a village, right? I know that place. People were frustrated. Many ran away to Ghana, and many joined the regime because they want to fight back against the military for frustration, right? Right now, there is no political party in the country. There is no opposition. Everyone is in exile, right? So all of these things makes the country right now to miss the opportunity to have all the brains to work together. So that's one thing, right? So also educating people is very important to talk about what they are going on right now. Now there is no check and balance. There is no education of the people. No one knows exactly what is happening. Even right now in Burkina Faso, to come to what you say, you can't even say that what the government is doing is not good. If you say that, you're going to be kidnapped and brought to the battlefield, right? So no one can speak. The only voice that matters right now is the voice of the president. He says what he wants.
Do people have food? Do they have water? Do they have the basics?
No.
I'll give you an opportunity
Yeah.
to answer.
Okay, so yeah, we can come.
You're going to address that?
Yeah. Okay, so we come to that. So the policy insight about that. So to say that, for example, studies show that democracy is still the best regime because you need to give voice to people, and also because you respect human rights and freedom of speech, it limits how much it is. But the hardcore one increased fatalities, but at the same time, it might backfire. That's why people say it's better to respect human life, right, by doing those. For in terms of policy insight, right, we say that, okay, how are we going to promote democracy in this context? What we're trying to do with this work is to say people there, they want democracy for sure. But the problem is they are facing situations that make them to be willing to kind of much more security. Now, what is important with democracy, it allows some kind of international cooperation with different organizations, right? The leadership are more open to discuss with a lot of people. For example, in the case of Burkina Faso, for example, the neighboring country like Ivory Coast is seen as an enemy, right? So they are attacking, etc. It might be true, might not be true, doesn't matter. What matters is like more than 5 million of Burkina Faso people live in Ivory Coast, right? And in the northern part of it, the government of Ivory Coast is taking care of more than 2,000 to 8,000 immigrants who run from Burkina Faso because of terrorism. So no matter what, diplomacy, a very smart approach will make you to have a very interesting collaboration with Ivory Coast to take care of your people. That's what matters. What democracy says is if you believe that the people's voice matters, accountability, the way you approach your policy is very important regarding that. Second, for countries like governing countries like in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the idea is even if you have to fight terrorism, you need to understand that what's matter for people is not only about food and water. They also want freedom. They also want to feel respected, right? This is very important. In my village, in my culture, they say, we prefer dying from hunger than being humiliated. And Burkina Faso, Burkina means the country of upright people. So we are not people that you buy with food. That's what Sankara said, right? We are not people that you buy with food, with water. First of all, we are upright. What does it mean? It's value. If they don't say the people where people are full, right? So it's a country where you have values. Values come first, and everything comes later on. So when you ignore that people are meant of value, they want freedom and independence, and you feel like where they need food, they need freedom, after a moment, when the freedom is not coming, in Mali is 5 years now. Recently, watch on TV, they were uploading the GDP because of the government's failing. So when you can't give security, because it's not easy to fight terrorism, you need to give some space for people to feel released, right? And when I'm able to talk about what I'm going through, it's half solved, right? But imagine I'm in a regime where they're killing my people, and they are saying that they are not killing anyone because they're not saying anything about people being killed, and I can't speak about it. It's worsening, right? And it's going to backfire with time. So policy means to be true. Open space for debate, for discussion, but at the same time, it doesn't mean stop providing water, electricity, and everything that's matter, right? That's what I want to say for this.
Okay, so I'll take one here, two, Gurma there, and three. Yeah.
I would like your kind of answered a little bit here and there, but I want to stick with the concept of democracy.
Yeah.
Which, we have a lot of armed conflict in my country as well. I appreciate that.
Which country is it again?
DR Congo.
Okay.
I appreciate when you say that there's a post-traumatic situation happening because most of our countries are actually post-traumatic countries. It's a continuous thing. And so when we have armed conflict, there tends to be an idea of like a justified violence, meaning people just kind of tend to gravitate towards the rebellious movements, even when they're doing exactly what the president that they're fighting against is doing. It's just that one feels more justified in doing it. My question is, I don't know because I wasn't there in the beginning, I don't know if it's a survey or how it occurred, but what definition of democracy did you actually give that these people, was it the fundamental idea of just governance or the process of power requiring like voting and whatnot, or was it a different definition that made these people gravitate towards democracy? Because generally speaking, when you do have an armed movement or whatever insurgent, people do tend to gravitate towards that strong leadership. And because we're African, we have our version of power. I feel like we nitpick on what we want with democracy. We feel like, oh, we like this, but at the same time we want one leader. So we want to vote for several parties, but then as soon as we elect one person, we adopt the same behaviors as if we had a one mono party. So I just wanted your idea on that.
Okay.
Good, yeah, thank you.
Following on from the DRC, which is a very heavy thing, and they have been going through war for a very long time.
Yeah.
You've just begun in Burkina. You might say food, electricity, water do not matter. They matter after 10 years of fighting. Yeah. They matter after 20 years, they matter after 30 years, they matter after 40 years. And after 40 years or 20 years or so, people call that terrorism if they don't have it. That is insecurity. Without food, you don't have security. You don't have anything. So that's a form of terrorism. I'm sorry, I just had to make that point.
No, it's okay. No, I got your point.
Question is, Burkina Faso's had FESPACO. You've had this great creative influence. A lot of tradition has been an African tradition, not just Burkina Faso's tradition of FESPACO. Everybody coming in from the continent, pouring their ideas. I can't understand, how has it come to now? What has made all of that just disappear, mean nothing, and brought it to now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, looking at what you're saying, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
Very informative. I think I'm going to attach myself to her question in terms of like what form of definition of democracy we're speaking about. Because in your presentation, things are popping out at me. For instance, you mentioned Thomas Sankara taking on the traditional leaders. And I'm thinking along the lines of, within the context of securitization theory, whereby the assemblage is put together to say, okay, I'm defining this thing as a threat and therefore we must respond accordingly. How does that analysis run through your study to say, okay, is it the right definition of democracy that you're presenting to these people? In terms of like, what is their tradition? This narrative of a failed state where this idea of the state as a polity imported from the West, being imposed on an African civilization. How does that speak to the ramifications of what's happening?
Okay. Yeah, these are very good questions, right? All of them, and thank you for your feedback. And these are the things we always discuss about what democracy is. And most of the friends there, they say, look, we have to think about an indigenous democracy or an African democracy, right? So we're going to come to this. First of all, for this study, we try to go to the basic understanding of democracy, which is institutional checks and balance, right? The basic one, freedom of expression, right to life. All of these basic elements that makes the person to exist first as a person in a society, to have responsibilities, but at the same time to be respected. That's the very basic one. So because there are people with different demographics, so you're not going to use the big things, but all involve the deliberative aspect of it, the participative aspect of it, and all the different aspects. We don't define democracy only as election, because that's also the mistake that people always believe that democracy is. And even that we had an open-ended question to ask what people think democracy is, to have their own perception of democracy. And you can see it vary on average. Many people said, look, we don't like democracy the way it was in Burkina Faso because for 27 years, Blaise Compaoré was in a democracy, didn't work. But it was a democracy, wasn't it? It was just an electoral autocracy. In Ivory Coast right now, we have an electoral autocracy. It's not a democracy. But they are going to blame Ivory Coast for being a democracy which is failing, but it's not a democracy. You see the thing? So now they are repressing my friends there. I'm following up in detail right now because everything related to process I'm interested in. They just shot people. They are just now protesting because of what is his fourth electoral term. It's not a democracy. DRC is not a democracy. Some people say Democratic Republic of Congo. Some even quote. I say it's not because you have Democratic Republic of Congo that is a democracy. So that's why we use a basic one. That's one. That's why I say, when I went to the people, when I talked to the people in the village, because I have the chance for more than 5 years going, we talked about FESPACO. We also have Sinedra I was really part of this project. That was even the one that helped us to build the contact with the people in the city. We had kind of documentaries on Lumumba. Because of it, we brought Raoul Lumumba in Burkina Faso, the son of Lumumba, Patrick Lumumba. We brought him, his sister. We brought a lot of activists across the world in Burkina Faso to try to discuss with people to see what it is. When I worked in the National Press Center before, and I was responsible of making data of journalists being killed across the world. From 1992 to 2011, when I was working, more than 144 journalists were killed in Africa, and most of them in Eritrea, like all this area of the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and Sudan. To tell you that all of these people are doing their work, right? What I'm saying. So people are aware of that. Burkina Faso have the tradition of freedom. We were working every 13 December because they killed Norbert Zongo. Norbert Zongo is an investigative journalist being killed by Blaise Compaoré in 1998. We're all walking on the streets in 15 October because of that. So people in Burkina Faso, they have a long history of democracy, participation, resistance, and all those checks and balance. This is something very important for that. So we need to agree on that. Yes, I agree on your question that food and other things matter. I didn't say it doesn't matter. What I said is just that we don't have to reduce people to food and water because they are more than that. And that's what I was saying, that, for example, even if you take the case of, for example, in Mali, before when people were fighting, they said security first. People say first security matter. Right now, they can't have food because they don't have fuel. And you're right? They can't have because the main road from Dakar to Bamako and Abidjan, that's where the terrorists are controlling. Even if you take the case of Burkina Faso, right now we have food insecurity. And you're right, because when terrorists arrive in a place, people have to run away so they can't continue farming because everything is 80% agriculture. So it's important. That's what I'm saying. But at the same time, what I'm saying that...
The land of upright men.
Yeah.
This should be the basics.
No, but it's not yet. But the thing is not even specific to Burkina Faso, for example. It's specific to most African. Even what they try, that's all the failed policies, right? For example, the monthly income in Burkina Faso is £30. Monthly income, £30. And 70% of it is for food and rent. 2% of it for just education. 1.2 of it is just for health, making 50% of people to go to take for the medical things in traditional doctors and stuff like that. That's the statistic about Burkina Faso before 2016 up to now. So no matter what you say, there was a reality of kind of poverty in this period, right? So we have to fight for it. But most of the policies failed. That's one to come to your question of what happened throughout this person. From the 60s, all the different policies have failed. We have failed to build up very strong to modernize the economy, what we say, like very strong industries, always captured by the powerful people. And the problem with the Sankara period was the concept of this revolution, right? People feel like bourgeoisie, commerce things like industrial are just, they are just counter-revolutionary. So it failed to really build a very strong industrial factory in this context. Like what Traoré is doing is kind of controlling everything. But the economy has its own structure, which is very complicated, right? Now they got the tomato industries, price is increasing. In the domestic market, for example, you have to compete between the domestically produced tomato paste and the imported one. The price of the imported one is very small. The one you produce locally because of the cost of electricity that we get from Ivory Coast. Water is because it's a highland, landlocked country, so it's very high. Corruption is very high. 6% of sales of companies are lost in doing business cost. To tell you. So it's very, in terms of structurally, the economy is weak, right? In terms of education, 75% of people are illiterate in the country, and 80% are living in the rural area with an income less than £20. How you do a revolution with these people? And you don't have a middle class, right? Independent. Most of them are government official, and they are linked to the government right now. If you don't follow up, you are in trouble. Happened before under the revolution of Sankara, before revolution of Sankara, even right now. So to tell you that structurally, we have to be very smart on how we're going to build it, right? So coming to the states, so I hope I answer your question. Coming to the state issue, when you talked about the failed state and stuff about, look, when we look at, for example, countries like most African countries most in general in Africa, there are very interesting studies on that. When we left after the independence in the 60s, first of all, the armies that the recruitment process during the colonial era wasn't democratic, right? They made it in a way that it created kind of instability. Most of the coup that happened in the 63 in Togo was made by people being trained, or they were in the colonial army. In Burkina Faso in 66, also colonial army. In kind of Ghana and the Nkrumah, almost all of these. So there is a very interesting study on the military role in politics. They show that most of these military recruited. In the beginning, it was a big challenge. So the first problem building the state was trust between the political elite and the army that we needed to solve. Second thing, the borders. The borders we inherited. For example, what's happened in Burkina Faso, we have one of the very tough fight for decolonization against the Boaba region were very strong. When you talk about democracy, they were very strong and independent people. In 1916, they destroyed, they burned the villages, they killed them. So, and then France, during the colonial era, imposed an autocratic regime rule in this country. So finally, when they created the country in 1919, and then after that, they split it, mixed it with Ivory Coast, we were one country, and they reconstituted it, they left the country extremely poor. So with elite that don't trust each other, education is very weak, no infrastructure, so we need to rebuild it from that point. And then coup happened in 1966, creating this within the army, a lot of trust. So in making that, it's easier to do a coup in Burkina Faso right now because there is no unity in the army right now. The army is more politicized. So making very fragile. So to tell you, when you look at the issue of, and also that's one thing. Second thing, after the colonial people, they put the border, they put different ethnic groups. Burkina Faso have 60 different ethnic groups. They have some problem within each other. So when they are together right now, to run these people, you need to run them in a way that involves people. You need to bargain with those communities. That's why democracy is necessary for this country where many ethnic groups have to find themselves within a border and they have to find a way to live and to do things together. They need bargaining power. In Burkina Faso, all of the Mosi people, my ethnic group, 50%, were the only one elected, Maurice Yamego and Roch Christian. All the others did coup d'etat to come on power, meaning that without coup, a minority will never be president in the country. So it means if it's more democratically open, including minority, we can expect to resolve this kind of issue. So to say that it's very, very difficult to find a way for Africans. But now, regarding, to finish with this one, the traditional part of it, people always say we need to think about democracy in African thing. I said, and I talked to people, if you want to apply the rules to become president king in Africa, many African dictators will never be president. Because the values that you need to follow, the respect for your people, because in Africa, power comes with responsibility, necessarily. Accountability, if you can remember all your kingdoms, before, many were made up by the colonialism, but many of them have responsibility. And the political culture of that was simple. Cheikh Anta Diop did a lot of great work about this cultural, mainly for the Burkina Faso, we have a constitutional monarchy. The Mogo Naba doesn't have any right on killing anyone. He has to respect the rule. There is all the different ministers in the kingdom. They are independent because the institutions were spiritualized at the time. The role of the Mogo Naba is to bring harmony and stability. That's why we want harmony and stability and values of justice and all the things. Now, what happened is when France took over in 1896 and the Mogo fell, what happened is they have to replace the way it was organized before, bring an illegitimate king there, destroy the way it was, and the new people during that era realized you can run this country without respecting the rule. Because in the mind of people in Burkina Faso particularly, if the king is not good and right, everything is going to be wrong. There will be an imbalance in the society. But now during the colonial era, people realized that this was a myth. You can be a bad king and run and nothing is going to happen, right? So it changes the political culture of these people.
Something happens. The people suffer.
You see?
The people suffer.
Yeah, they suffer. Exactly, they suffer, exactly. But before, for example, when it's a bad king, the clergy will kill him. You have a lot of people, we call it the poison. They have the poison, they kill the kings. They have a lot of kings being killed because they were not running the country very well. And it's put in the constitutions that when you don't run it in a way that works, they're going to kill you. So to tell you that we lost this, so what we're saying is we lost what we had before colonialism, so we don't have to be nostalgic on thinking that we're going to go there because the institution was spiritualized in a certain way. But the values of accountability, the value of checks and balance, the value of freedom and independence, all those things are embedded in the democracy. You can call it whatever you want, but the respect of the human being, respect of life, right? Having a say in how the country is run, this is the basic thing you can give to anyone.
Yeah. Okay, so we are running out of time, but I'm going to do one last round of questions, really short questions. One here. Girma, you have the opportunity, so if there's no other hands, then I'll give that to Girma. Any other? Okay, so we have two. Okay.
I'm over time, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, feel free. No, it's okay, don't worry.
That's really good.
All right,
Yeah.
okay, so.
Yeah.
So I'm from Afghanistan. We had
Okay.
democracy from 2001 to 2021. And democracy collapsed because extremist actors, they framed the government is a Western imposition not compatible with Islam. Based on your research in Burkina Faso, how can democratic messages be reshaped to stay credible in places where terrorism attacks the moral legitimacy of a democratic institute, a democratic state?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very good question, yeah. Another one.
Okay, so it's like, is it Girma or?
Yeah, okay.
Can you make it brief?
Very quick.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm leaning on this traditional thing. Is framing the current leadership as a strongman, is that trying to sweep away the heritage? I mean, like, descended from the Muslim Empire who were really strong against colonial invasion. Is this not a replica of the tradition, and is sensitizing the people about that heritage, not a way of getting the original form of democracy?
Thank you. So, yeah.
My quick question is, I was interested in the legal framework. You mentioned, I think you said there's 6 ethics?
You see?
You said 60 or 6?
60.
60, okay. We have 500. But in our law, we are obliged when we nominate a prime minister or different heads of institution to respect the different provinces. It has to. So just in line with the checks and balances, was there included what is already inherent in the Burkina Faso constitution, the legal framework is what I want to know. Because in Africa, sometimes a lot of things are written, they just don't abide by. So that's why I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I gave way because you wanted to.
you could ask.
Oh, I could
Yeah,
ask.
go, yeah.
Very quickly, please.
Briefly, bringing back the kings or that traditional structure, what would it take in today's world to bring it back? Because I don't think Africa, as it is, colonial Africa, can last. It was built on a very flimsy, what would you want to say, fundamentals. It cannot last as it is.
Yeah.
It has failed consistently and consistently and consistently. And we have to go back, in my opinion, to the systems of before and have a real African system.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that will work?
Yeah.
And what it brings about?
Okay, thank you.
So if you can answer briefly.
Briefly, okay. Yeah. For the last one, the traditional structure, I will start by that and go. I think it's hard to say we go back, but we need to really understand how people live and what were the values there, right? To understand the relationship to all the institutions. And this is important. The first thing that I think was important is the respect of people. For example, I've been in Uganda, right? They call it Odembe Oriobuntu, right? That's the freedom to express yourself, to think about it. So there was a kind of stability. What people really want in Africa is a stable regime. But now, because before it was linked to spirituality that was limiting the power of every different people, we have to find what people can believe in right now, which are not the ancestors and God, to make institutions stable. Then we need to make it sure that it should be the constitution right now. Because God's ancestor, we don't believe in it anymore. People say they believe, but they don't believe in it. So what I'm saying here, this is one thing. Another important thing is the chief or the king was respecting the life of people within the kingdom. They have rules to do things. Right now, when you take about the case, for example, a strongman in Africa, for example, or what is happening in Burkina Faso with Traoré right now, what you said. For example, like the last 2 weeks, he's been kidnapping people, right? He take them, they disappear, he bring them back, he do what he want. The problem is not that, right? The problem is you don't have to decide as if the country is yours, right? You have to respect some rules. If it was before, in the former kingdom, this would never happen that way because there are clear rules, right? So being a strong man doesn't mean you have to respect the life of people who are living with you. You have to consider that. That's not the case right now. So what I'm saying here is the strong man is not the man who is autocratic. It's not the man who destroy the life of people. He's a man who make the state to grow strongly where people can live independently there. So I think this is very important. So if we try to understand the political science related to African history, and how we can try to rebuild this within the framework of democracy, because I think the framework of democracy is still the best, because it allows people to feel involved in how the country has to be run, and I think this is important. And regarding the legal framework of ethnicity, we don't really have something. No, we don't have it. No, we don't have it. No, we don't have anything. It's now they're trying to have a clear text regarding how to regulate the chief, to try to see how they're going to involve. But the idea is they have to stick away from the normal politics, and then they have to just be there for social stuff like that.
Can I just also add to DRC of 500 tribes, so to speak, and I think Nigeria has also
200, around 200, yeah.
I mean, these are crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, in part of your readings, there were colonial created tribes.
No, but that was just an example based off of the example I was bouncing off of it.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
idea was in your states, because you're talking a lot about checks and balances.
Yeah, exactly.
Was the legal framework of Burkina Faso also included in your research?
Yeah.
Because maybe there are aspects that you would want to retain and others that you would want to. I was just curious about that.
Yeah. No, we didn't really take it more specific. We just tried to take it in more general, because that's the thing. Yeah, so for the question regarding the, yes, so for example, when you talked about whether the strongman or the current leadership, if you can frame it as a strongman, is a way of going back and rebuilding it. No, I said it's not, based on what I said, because it depends on what you put inside the strongman, right? Most of the time in Africa, before, if you elect the king, it wasn't a strongman. It was strong institutions, because the king is not a person, because they said that the king reigned, but the custom governed, right? So it's like, it's there. You will come, if you fail, they kill you, disappear. So meaning that what's matter is the institutions that makes the king strong, not the king that makes the institution strong. So sometimes, but in our case, we don't have strong institution, making everything vulnerable. That's why most of the empires were minimum 500, like Mali Empire was like more than 1,000 years, Ghana Empire, everything. They were very stable and longer. Yes, the Ghana Empire was 1,000 years, the Mosi Empire was more than 500 and 600 years. But the year this because people were believing in the institutions. And the people believe that their responsibility to respect all the institutions, and the people having these positions have the responsibility also to respect the people below. That was a kind of clear responsibility and role defined. But now there is not. In the situation where we have right now, any president can wake up and do whatever they have to want, like in Burkina Faso, in Ivory Coast, in Congo, in Gabon. Every president, as long as they get to power, they use the power to oppress the people, and it doesn't work. So the strongman is not that. So that's what I want to say. And coming to your question regarding the Afghanistan and terrorism, it's a very very difficult, right? Because what is happening mostly in this area is the narrative. For example, the JINIM in Burkina Faso right now, they have a different approach that they are mobilizing people. They use the kind of anti-Western narrative. They're using the Pan-African.
Like the Taliban, or am I getting this wrong? Is the JINI like the
No, JINI, no, it's kind of affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Slightly different. But the thing here is, what is happening when they just take over, they start now framing it differently. They are saying, look, we are anti-West because we are fighting the Western interests. So anytime you are going to school, you speak French, everything like that, these are Western things. We need to establish more order, more discipline, and so on like that. And then so by doing so in this area, they're also opening space for economy, because a lot of things are economy. And because the state is not reaching that point, the JINIM is allowing them to have some kind of smuggling, a lot of things, opportunities of making money there. For example, Burkina Faso is exporting a lot of gold. The artisanal minings, they control it, they allow them to do that, and they take a little bit of money. So where government were putting strong regulation, JINIM open up and let them do. Where government were blocking smuggling, the JINIM open it. So what's happening is people are just rallying around the JINIM because they can make money, they feel protected, and because the government is failing there is this rationality that between choosing two fighters, I will fight the one who is more likely to win and secure me, right? And second, the government, because the government can't, because being a government is very complicated. That's why you need to be careful, because you don't know who is a terrorist, right? In the case of Al-Shabaab, a blind woman killed the mayor of Mogadishu. She was from Al-Shabaab. She was joining the meeting for more than 2 months, and she exploded one day, killing the mayor. So you can never know. A 10-year-old boy can be. So for the government, it's very complicated to know who is terrorist or not. But the terrorist doesn't care about who I'm killing. The government needs to care about that. So meaning that the way the government is going to approach terrorism, using human rights, respectful, trying to make it in a way that you don't kill your people, you don't make your people to be fearful of you, gives more weight to the government on top of the ideology you put. But in the case of Burkina Faso, I don't know if it might be for your case, people are more fearful of the government where the government control. And then they feel more secure on the other side. So making the government not only lose the battles, but you're losing your people also. So even no matter the narrative you're putting right now there, it's very hard for you to win and to control the people. So I think we need to combine a good narrative, but at the same time, you need to provide this political environment that makes people to be safe. That's what I wanted to add for this. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.